So this trip began on Saturday, December the 18th, and ended at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. And so everything that happened in between is what we'll discuss in this interview. Okay, my name is Todd Smith, and I work at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I've been working there for 13 years, and also do part-time work for Premier Alaska Tour Company as a tour bus driver. So it began at the house. We started out, we had breakfast. We met for breakfast at Chattanooga Lodge. We sat around and talked about the ride and how nice the weather was going to be and how the snow conditions weren't that great yet, but we thought that there would be good conditions where we were heading. And I knew the trail, and I have maps of the trail, and I was all ready to leave the ride when we decided to head out from Chattanooga Lodge. We've been not very long actually. We bought a 2020 Bearcat in 2020, and so that was 2 years ago, and that was our first. We have a smaller Polaris at home that we've ridden around the house and one trip in the White Mountains, but for the most part, when it comes to really out riding, 2 years is probably about the limit of what, and right when we bought it, we made the decision to get in with a club of people that are familiar with how to snow machine, what to do, how to ride, and learn the trails and that kind of thing. So that's what we did right away when we got it. On this particular ride, we had 10 people, not including ourselves. So it must have been 11 machines. We were the only 2-up machines, so I guess there was 12 of us altogether, 10 machines altogether. And so that can vary a lot. And until you go into these rides and until you get to the trailhead and unload the machines, and normally we have a set time of say 10 o'clock in the morning, that's when we're leaving the trailhead. You might have 5 people, you might have 25 people. You just don't know who's going to show up and who's not. So on this particular day, we had 10. And everybody gets to the trailhead, and we all unload the machines, and we have a circle group meeting. And we talk about things like, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, we'll take breaks along the way, who's in lead, and we always have someone to sweep. And we always usually have the radios too, so we can talk to this person and sweep with the radios. So we had all that together before the ride took off, and we left the trailhead about 11 a.m. The trail, when we started out, the trail was in really good condition considering the amount of snow we had. A lot of it was pretty smooth trail. It was apparent that the BLM had not gotten out and groomed the trail yet, or even maintain the trail yet, and we found out about that later also. But the trail is used by mushers and trappers and a lot of outdoors people, so you can tell it had been used quite a bit. It was up to the point to where on a 2-up machine that we were riding, we were doing up to 30 miles an hour at times. But then also we got into a little bit of muskeg, a little bit of bumpy, and so we had slowed pretty far down, and we were just going. And actually what happens is you go up McKay Creek Trail, and about 5 miles in, this trail splits. And if you go to the right, you go to Lower Nome Creek Trail, and if you go to the left, it continues to McKay Creek Trail well into the White Mountains. So we went to the right, and our intention was to go down Lower Nome Creek Trail, cross Nome Creek, get on Nome Creek Road, and ride to Mount Prindle Campground on the road, because we didn't know how the snow conditions were going to be, so we kind of planned that as to see how things would go. 2 miles after we got onto Lower Nome Creek Trail, Christine and I were in the lead. We were doing about 18 miles an hour, and the weather conditions were cloudy. It was some flat light. It was a little bit of snow. And I mean, we came upon a sinkhole so quickly that we never had time to react, never had time to pull the brakes. And this thing was in the trail, and it was not marked. Stepping ahead a little bit, we learned later that if you looked, you could see where people had gone around it. But this was, if you're looking ahead and you see the trail ahead of you, the hole was right there in front of us, and we hit the hole about 18 miles an hour. Now the hole was about 8 foot in diameter by about 4 feet deep, and this front of the machine dropped and hit the other side, and it came to a sudden stop. Christine was thrown from the machine completely. She never touched the machine. She was completely thrown from it. We had all our gear on. We had helmets. We had face shields. We had all of our gear. So we weren't riding without helmets or anything like that. I took the brunt of the force. I didn't go over the windshield because the handlebars caught my upper thighs and it stopped me, but it also put my right knee into the console and broke the console. Tim came down right away in the hole. He was behind me and he was helping me. And another lady that was with us, her name is Ruth, and she helped Christine out of the hole, because this is not a hole that Christine could have just walked out of, or I could have just walked out of. It was fairly steep and deep. Somewhere along them helping Christine out and Tim being with me in the hole, I passed out. Tim says about at least 2, if not 3 times. Literally standing there talking. I remember saying, I'm feeling real dizzy, and the next thing you know, I'm not standing anymore. I'm sitting down in the bottom of the hole again. So at least twice I passed out. The pain wasn't exactly excruciating. It's just that I think when this happens, you get adrenaline surge, which causes a certain amount of shock, and then that's what causes a person to pass out. Yeah. I do remember as I was in the hole before they got me out, and Tim was in there dealing with me, one of the other gentlemen, and his name is Brad, and he asked the question, I remember hearing him, do we need to press the SOS button on the Inreach? And Tim said, yes, we need to get some help out here now. And so at that time, the SOS button on his Inreach was activated. We have an Inreach also, and our Inreach was on, and it was on the machine. Worst case scenario, I could have reached our Inreach and hit the button. But there's more issues with that, and I'll explain that too. But it was better to have him do it and deal with the call center and the texting back and forth than having me try to do that. So it was a better deal of him hitting the button on the Inreach and requesting help. The Garmin Inreach calls, and none of us have ever done this before, so he didn't know exactly what to expect. But the call center was texting him right away. What kind of assistance do you need? You know, what's going on? And they started texting the call center back. We have this individual who was injured in a snow machine accident. We're out in the wilderness. They already know where you are because they have your exact location. And they would ask questions, age of the person, male or female, what kind of injuries, are they life-threatening injuries? You know, and at that time, they really didn't know. And so their main answer was, we need to get help out here as soon as possible. They got Christine out of the hole. They got me out of the hole. I didn't know they were going to be able to get me out because of my leg. At first, we had thought about maybe hooking the winch that the other gentleman had in his machine to me and winching me out of the hole or backing me out, but they were able to get me out. 30 minutes after we did that, this other gentleman named Dan came by in his snow machine that is not part of our club. And he just happened to be coming by at that time, and he runs a dog mushing home. And on his sled that he pulled behind his snow machine, he had a wall tent with a wood stove. And they had that tent up in 5 minutes. And a cot. And they had lit the wood stove. So in that amount of time, they got the wood stove going, they got the cot set up, they had the tent set up. They laid me inside of the sled and slid me over to the door of the tent, and then got me inside the tent and on the cot. And we still didn't know the extent of my injuries. I mean, we knew that my leg was hurt. But talking to medical professionals, you might have an injury that hurts a lot, and it'll block out any other injury you might have, and you may have other injuries and you just don't know about it. So they just didn't know at that time. The helicopter, it took about right at 3.5 hours. So and there's a few reasons behind that. when you hit the SOS button on the Inreach, it goes to their call center, and they have a call center down in the lower 48. And these people have done this before. This isn't their first rodeo. The first thing they do is whoever owns the Inreach usually has one or two emergency contacts. They will call those emergency contacts and they will say, this person hit this button on the Inreach and was involved in a snow machine accident. The kicker was Brad was not involved in the snow machine accident, and they called his mother in Arizona and told her that he was. So if you own an Inreach and have emergency contacts, be sure your emergency contacts know that they could get called if the button never gets pressed. So once he pressed the button on the Inreach, it went to the call center, and they were fast. They started texting right back, got all the information, what was wrong, who needed help, what kind of help, was the person seriously injured or not. The call center then starts contacting our local authorities. I know they contacted the Alaska State Troopers, and I know they contacted, I found this out later, the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center, if that's the right terminology. And then the Rescue Coordination Center contacted the U.S. Army to see about getting a helicopter. There was two plans. One was to get the Blackhawk out there. Now, this was a Saturday. That means that these gentlemen were on call, at home, in the barracks, whatever. So they had to get called in, they had to get out to the helicopter, they had to get geared up, they had to get the helicopter prepped and launch it and then get out. And Garmin sends them the coordinates and they punch those coordinates in. So it's not something about where they have to go out and start looking for you. They know where you are. And they flew that thing right to us, and it was getting a little dusk by the time it arrived, but it was right at 3.5 hours. So in preparation for the helicopter coming, because the people on the Inreach, the coordination center or whoever was coming back and saying they're going to send a Blackhawk for you. It's still on the ground. This is the amount of time we expect it to be before it's in the air. Once it's in the air, they send another message. They'll be there in 20 to 30 minutes. They just launched. So they were on it. They were keeping us up to date exactly what was going on. And so the gentlemen that were there with us took their snow machines and they went to an open field near where we were and they rode them back and forth and flattened it out and took down all the small trees to make a landing spot for the helicopter. And luckily they even had flares out there so that they can flare the place up when the helicopter came in. But what they didn't realize was that when they put this landing spot for the helicopter, it was so close to us that the prop wash would have just blown everybody away. And the helicopter crew chose not to land because of the prop wash. So he went down the trail and he lowered one medic down. And then the people that were there led the medic to the tent where I was. And he did an evaluation on me. And he asked where the injury was, and if there were other injuries. And then he came back out and he says, okay, we're not gonna be able to land, but we're gonna hoist you up into the helicopter. And the gentleman who had the tent and the wood stove and the sled, my snow machine was loaded into his sled and hauled back to the trailhead, so he was gone. So we didn't have a way to get me and it was quite a walk from here to the next building, I guess. They had to carry me from the tent to the landing zone, from where the helicopter was hovering with the cable coming down on this hoist that they were going to hoist me up with. And once they got there, they put me down, and it was, the gentleman from the medic told me, he says, it's going to be very challenging. He says, because you have prop wash, extremely high winds, it's dusk and blowing snow and everything. So I was lucky enough. He gave me some earplugs. I put earplugs in. I put my helmet on. I put my goggles on. The only thing I didn't have, which I don't even know where they were my gloves. So I was out there with bare hands. So they hauled me out to the landing spot. And after they dropped me off, the medic told them just to back off. And you couldn't even talk because you couldn't hear each other because of the noise. And this device that they hoisted me on, and I don't know how to describe it other than it looked very similar to a boat anchor, with two bicycle seats opposite of each other. And as I was sitting on the ground, he took the device and he crammed one of the seats underneath my crotch. And he went around and he did some strapping or something like that. And then he got on the other side and did the same thing and we hoisted up. And I didn't have any gloves, so I was holding onto the cable like this. And it did not, to me, it did not feel secure at all whatsoever. But I kept saying to myself, these guys have done this 100 times. They know what they're doing. I'm sure they don't drop people. It did not feel secure at all whatsoever. And when you're going up on this hoist and you have your helmet on and your goggles, the only thing you can see is the trail and the ground and the trees, and it keeps going lower, but you can't look up and see the helicopter. So you can't tell how high it is. But it's just the wind and the noise is just unbelievable. And so next thing I know, the wheel of the helicopter is here, and then the fuel tank and the door. And they had to turn us so they can get us between the fuel tank and the door and get the door open. And then the gentleman inside hoisted us inside the helicopter and then put me on the gurney. Once inside the helicopter, they unhooked the hoist, they closed the door, and inside was warmer than it was outside. It was not really less noisy. The medics had talking devices that they can talk to each other with. I could not hear them and they could not hear me, and that's how noisy is inside there, even with the doors closed. So, but they were professionals, absolutely. They got right to it. There were 3 of them. One was doing blood pressure. The other one went to set an IV. He tried to find an IV in this arm, and I was pointing to the other one, so they swapped and they put one in this arm. They gave me ketamine, which I found out later. I wasn't sure. I never heard of ketamine. I didn't know what it was, but it's an interesting drug. You'll forget anything and everything, and you won't care about anything. But we rode, and you're laying in there, and you can't see anything outside. You can see the window above you, and you can see the helicopter blades, but you can't see any lights. You can't tell where you're going. But they flew us and they landed us at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, maybe about a 15-20 minute ride. And an ambulance met us over there because when they landed on the helicopter pad, the hospital is too far away to carry you in a stretcher. The hospital doesn't have an ambulance. They have to call an ambulance from one of the fire departments to meet the helicopter at the landing pad to take you into the hospital emergency room. So they put me from the helicopter into the ambulance and into the emergency room. I think that's mostly, every day, first of all, obviously I'm on crutches and I have a broken leg. A day doesn't go by, I don't think about that accident. And this happened in December. This was almost a month and a half ago, and every single day I remember that accident. And I still see going down that trail, and I see that hole right there in front of us and not being able to do anything and hitting that hole. I see that all the time. That's what I remember every single day. There are things that we learned. One of the things that we learned is that for people who go out and bring safety gear and emergency equipment with them, never think that it's just going to be, this is just a quick little ride in the White Mountains. These are the places where people go. We're not going out to unexplored territory. We're not going to climb the Alaska range. We're just going for a little trail ride out in the White Mountains. And you have to be prepared. For every single time you go out there, you have to be prepared. And you can't just leave things at home thinking, this is just going to be a walk in the park, little trail ride. There's nothing to this. That's not the case. You have to always go out prepared. And there is one other thing I learned, and I'll tell you that in 1 second. But one of the biggest things is that Inreach. And I just can't say enough how important it was to have that. I don't care if there was 20 of us out there or there were 2 of us out there. If you get yourself in a situation, you can press that and somebody's on the other end of that line, and it doesn't matter if you're in cell phone service or not, they will communicate with you. One of the mistakes I made that I learned right away was that we don't bring our glasses with us when we ride. We leave them in the truck. I could not read a single text on my phone without my glasses. I was in the tent texting my daughter, and I had to hand someone my phone for them to read to me what she was typing because I could not read it without my glasses. I've learned since then the best thing that if you're going to do that and you find yourself in that situation, and it's not just reading text from government. I mean, it could be anything. Go to the drugstore, get a set of cheap reading glasses, and put them in your kit in your pack. Rule number one. Because if you can't read and you have to press that button and you can't read what they're texting you, what are you going to do? The other thing I learned, and I think this has been said before through other safety groups that we've talked to, is that when you have your Inreach, and I keep using the word Inreach even though there's a brand, and there are other brands out there you can use, and some are just as good as others. But don't leave it in your pack on your snow machine. Put it on you. Keep it in your pocket where you can reach it. Because if you do get seriously injured and you do get thrown from the machine, you may not be able to get back to it to press that button. Ours is mounted on the machine. If I had to, I could have reached ours and I could have pressed the button. But I could easily see how you could end up in a situation where you can't reach it and press that button. And then the machine is down there with your Inreach on it, you're stuck somewhere else and you have no way to communicate. When they bind it, doesn't do you any good at all whatsoever. So
or it's sunk in the river.
Or it's sunk in the river, or exactly. But I think it's just so important just to keep it in a zip pocket in your coat or whatever it takes, So that's something I think we learned also. I think that on this particular day, what happened was that we did go out there with the mindset of this is just going to be an easy walk in the park ride, and a lot of people didn't bring the gear with them they needed. Essential gear, flares and a flare gun. I mean, we didn't have to flare the helicopter, but it's so important to have that. I mean, they'll start a fire. A flare will start a fire for you. If you might have everything else get wet, but that flare will start a fire for you. If nothing else, a tarp. For me personally, if that gentleman who came over with the tent and the wood stove would not have come over, I would have been out in the cold and the snow. And this is how my body reacted to that. I was inside the tent. It's not a very big tent. And he has a wood stove, and Tim was feeding the wood into the wood stove, so he's going in and out. I'm laying on the cot, and I have all my gear on. I didn't take anything off, and I'm shivering, and I can't get warm. And he comes in the tent and he says, I can't stay in here. He says, it's too hot. He says, it's too hot to stand in here. And I'm laying there and I'm not on the ground, I'm on a cot. And I can't get warm because I'm shivering. If I would have been outside that entire time, it would have been, we could have built a fire. We would have had to build a fire. Even though the temperature was 15 degrees, you have all this gear, and normally people don't get cold when you're out there like that. But if a person is injured, that person is going to need something more than the next person will. So fire building equipment is also very important. Fire starting, fire building, and that could go along with the flares. A tarp. They could have put me on a tarp and drugged me to the helicopter landing spot instead of carrying me out there. It took 5 of them to lift my 265 pounds out to that landing spot where the helicopter was. We didn't have a tarp. Splints. We could have used what we had to splint my leg. I mean, there was plenty of dead trees and everything, but if you can go to the safety store, Arctic Fire and Safety here in Fairbanks, I think Anchorage has ones too, and get splinting equipment, that's super important, because if they have to move you, when they moved me, I felt it every single time they moved me, and they were careful too, but there was nothing they could do, But having splints is really important, and having something to treat a person for shock, or knowing how to do it. Because it doesn't matter what kind of injury the person has, anything can cause a person to go into shock if they have injuries, So that's the kind of safety things I think is really important. That's the basics, There's always more you can have, but flares, fire starting, splints, and at least a tarp. And with a tarp, you can set up a little tent. You could build a fire by the tent and get some heat in it. You could do something like that. Ropes, just a thing of rope, string, knives, your basic leatherman, it'll work wonders.